The November rain had soaked through Marcus Webb's jacket hours ago, the thin fabric offering no protection against the cold that settled deep into his bones. He sat beneath the awning of a closed electronics store on Fifth Avenue, his military-issue duffel bag serving as both pillow and protection for the few possessions he still owned. The storefront's security lights cast harsh shadows across the sidewalk, illuminating the steady stream of well-dressed people hurrying past without so much as a glance in his direction. Marcus had become an expert at being invisible. 3 years living on the streets had taught him which corners offered the best shelter, which neighborhoods tolerated his presence, and how to fade into the urban landscape so completely that people looked right through him. It was a survival skill he'd never expected to need when he'd enlisted at 18, full of purpose and patriotism. The Marines had promised to make him into something. They delivered on that promise, but nobody had warned him that what they made him into wouldn't fit back into civilian life. The crowds thinned as evening deepened into night, the theater district emptying after the final curtain calls. Marcus was considering moving to his usual sleeping spot in the subway station when he noticed the leather wallet lying against the building's corner, half hidden in the shadow between streetlights. His first instinct was to look around for its owner, but the sidewalk had emptied except for a few scattered pedestrians already blocks away. He picked up the wallet with fingers that trembled from cold and something else. The muscle memory of handling objects that didn't belong to him, the weight of decisions made in desperation. The leather was expensive, butter-soft, and warm from recent contact with its owner's body. Marcus opened it carefully, noting the thick stack of bills inside without counting them. His stomach clenched with hunger that had become so familiar it was almost comforting in its constancy. The driver's license behind its plastic window showed a man in his late 50s with silver hair and dark eyes that seemed to assess the camera with calculating intensity. Domenico Castellano. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but the address, a building in the most exclusive part of the Upper East Side, spoke of wealth beyond anything Marcus had known, even before the streets claimed him. He could take the cash. Nobody would know. The wallet's owner probably wouldn't even miss a few $100s. And Marcus could eat properly for the first time in weeks. Could buy a new jacket, maybe even rent a motel room for a night where he could sleep without one eye open, without the constant vigilance that exhausted him more than physical labor ever had. But his hand moved to close the wallet without removing a single bill. Some part of him that the war and the streets hadn't quite destroyed rebelled at the thought. He'd lost almost everything, his career, his home, his sense of purpose. But he hadn't lost this. Whatever this was. Pride, maybe. Or stupidity. The distinction seemed increasingly unclear. The address was 40 blocks north. Marcus tucked the wallet carefully into his inner jacket pocket, shouldered his duffel, and started walking. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the city lights fracturing across wet pavement in abstract patterns that might have been beautiful if Marcus had the energy to appreciate beauty anymore. His leg ached by the 20th block, the old injury from Kandahar making itself known with each step. Shrapnel had torn through his calf during his third deployment, the surgery and physical therapy eating through his benefits before infection set in and everything spiraled. He'd lost the leg, then the pain medication that helped him function, then the apartment when he couldn't work, then the girlfriend who'd promised to weather anything with him until anything became too much. By block 30, he was limping badly, his breath coming in harsh gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the panic that sometimes grabbed him without warning. The therapist at the VA had called it PTSD, had prescribed medication Marcus couldn't afford, and suggested coping mechanisms that didn't work when you were sleeping on concrete, with one eye open for people who might hurt you while you were vulnerable. He forced himself to keep walking, to focus on the simple mechanics of forward motion. Left foot, right foot. Ignore the pain, ignore the voices telling him this was foolish, that he should have taken the money, that nobody would thank him for his honesty. The neighborhood transformed around him as he walked north, the buildings growing taller and more imposing, the doormen more numerous, the sense of wealth and security more pronounced with each block. The address on the license led him to a pre-war building with an ornate facade and a doorman who looked at Marcus with the particular expression he'd learned to recognize. Not quite hostile, but wary, assessing him as a potential threat to be neutralized before he could disturb the building's residents. "Can I help you?" The doorman's tone made clear that help was the last thing he intended to provide. Marcus straightened despite the pain in his leg, falling into the military posture that his body remembered even when his mind wanted to forget. "I found a wallet. Belongs to one of your residents." He pulled the leather billfold from his pocket, holding it up so the doorman could see. "Domenico Castellano, I'd like to return it." The doorman's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been concern or calculation. "Wait here," he said finally, disappearing into the lobby and leaving Marcus standing on the sidewalk like the unwelcome presence he was. 10 minutes passed. Marcus considered leaving the wallet with the doorman and disappearing back into the anonymity of the streets, but something kept him rooted in place. Maybe it was the foolish hope that someone might acknowledge what he'd done, might see past the dirty clothes and unkempt beard to the person underneath. Maybe he was just too tired to walk another 40 blocks tonight. When the lobby door finally opened, it wasn't the doorman who emerged, but a tall man in an expensive suit, his silver hair matching the photograph on the license. Domenico Castellano, in person, was more imposing than his picture suggested, carrying himself with the kind of unconscious authority that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. Behind him stood two younger men with the alert stillness of professional security, their eyes scanning the street with practiced efficiency. Domenico studied Marcus for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in the worn military jacket, the duffel bag, the obvious exhaustion. "You found my wallet," he said finally, his voice carrying a faint accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. "Yes, sir." Marcus held out the wallet. "Everything should be there. I didn't take anything." Domenico accepted the wallet, opening it to check its contents with movements that suggested he was confirming something he already knew. "Everything is here," he confirmed, his gaze returning to Marcus's face, "including a significant amount of cash that most people in your situation would have found very tempting." "Most people don't have my training, sir." The words came out more sharply than Marcus intended, years of frustration bleeding through his careful control. He'd been many things before the streets claimed him, and a thief wasn't one of them. Something shifted in Domenico's expression, calculation giving way to genuine curiosity. "Military?" "Marine Corps, 3 tours in Afghanistan." Marcus's hand moved unconsciously to his leg. "Honorable discharge after an injury ended my career." "And now you're homeless." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." No point denying what was obvious from his appearance. Domenico was quiet for a moment, then reached into the wallet and pulled out several bills. "For your trouble and your honesty." Marcus looked at the money, more than he'd seen in months, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated. Something that felt dangerously close to shame. "I didn't return it for a reward, sir." "I know." Domenico held the bills out with steady patience. "That's why I'm offering it, because you did the right thing when doing the wrong thing would have been easier and more profitable. That's rare. It deserves recognition." Marcus's hand shook as he accepted the money, pride warring with desperate need. The bills felt impossibly crisp and clean against his dirt-stained fingers. "Thank you, sir." Domenico studied him for another moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed in ways he didn't fully understand. "Where did you serve?" "Helmand Province, mostly. Fob Jackson." The names brought back memories Marcus usually kept buried: heat and dust, and the constant awareness that any step might be your last, that any child might be carrying explosives, that trust could get you killed faster than enemy fire. "I knew men who served there," Domenico said quietly. "Good men. Brave men. Many of them struggled when they came home. He paused. What's your name? Marcus Webb, sir. Marcus Webb. Domenico repeated the name as if committing it to memory. Where are you staying tonight? The question was delivered so casually that it took Marcus a moment to process it. I have a spot, he said vaguely, not wanting to admit that his spot was a subway station platform where the security guards knew him by sight and mostly left him alone. Domenico's expression suggested he understood exactly what kind of spot Marcus meant. I own a building downtown, small apartments, mostly rented to students and young professionals. There's a vacant unit on the third floor. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card and a set of keys. The address is on the card. The apartment is furnished, basic but clean and warm. Consider it payment for your honesty. Marcus stared at the keys in Domenico's extended hand, unable to process what was being offered. Sir, I can't. You can, and you will. Domenico's tone carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The apartment would sit empty otherwise. You'd be doing me a favor by occupying it, keeping it lived in and maintained. I don't have money for rent. The admission cost Marcus something, but lies seemed pointless with a man who'd already seen him at his lowest. The first 3 months are free. After that, we'll discuss your situation and see what arrangement makes sense. Domenico pressed the keys into Marcus's hand, his grip firm and warm against Marcus's cold fingers. There's a deli on the corner. Tell Giuseppe that Domenico sent you, and he'll make sure you get dinner tonight. Tomorrow, come see me at this address. He produced another card. 10 o'clock. We'll talk about employment possibilities. Marcus looked down at the keys and cards in his hand, his vision blurring slightly. Why are you doing this? Because you walked 40 blocks in the rain with an injured leg to return something that didn't belong to you when you could have taken the money and disappeared. Domenico's voice softened slightly. Because men who make those choices deserve better than sleeping on streets. And because I remember what it's like to be desperate and alone, wondering if anyone would extend a hand if you needed one. Before Marcus could formulate a response, Domenico turned and walked back into the building, his security detail falling into step behind him. The doorman followed, leaving Marcus standing alone on the sidewalk with a handful of bills, 2 business cards, and a set of keys that felt heavier than they should. He stood there for a long time, the November wind cutting through his wet jacket, trying to convince himself this was real. That he hadn't hallucinated the entire interaction. That somewhere in this city, there was now a warm apartment with his name on it, waiting for him to claim it. The address on the first card led him to a neighborhood in transition, old warehouses being converted to lofts, while family-owned businesses held on to their storefronts with stubborn determination. The building was exactly as Domenico had described, modest but well-maintained, with a clean lobby and an elevator that worked smoothly. The third-floor apartment was small, barely more than a studio, but it had a bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with hot water, and windows that looked out over the street rather than into an alley. Marcus stood in the doorway for several minutes, unable to take that final step inside. The last time he'd had a real home was 3 years ago, before everything fell apart. Crossing this threshold felt like tempting fate, like the universe would realize its mistake and snatch this away just as it had taken everything else. But his leg was screaming, his body was exhausted, and the apartment was warm in a way he'd almost forgotten existed. He stepped inside, closed the door, and for the first time in years, he locked it from the inside rather than being locked out. The hot shower nearly broke him. Marcus stood under the spray until the water ran cold, watching 3 years of street grime spiral down the drain, trying to wash away the accumulated weight of his circumstances. He found clean towels in the bathroom cabinet, clothes that roughly fit his size in the dresser, basic toiletries arranged neatly on the counter. Someone, Domenico, presumably, had stocked this apartment not just with necessities, but with dignity. He ate the dinner Giuseppe prepared with the kind of focused intensity that came from extended hunger, tasting real food for the first time in weeks. The deli owner had recognized Domenico's name immediately, had treated Marcus with a respect he hadn't experienced since before his discharge, had pressed extra bread and pastries into his hands for breakfast. That night, lying in an actual bed with actual sheets, Marcus couldn't sleep. The mattress felt too soft after years of concrete and cardboard. The silence of the apartment felt too complete without the constant urban symphony of the streets. But most of all, he couldn't quiet the voice in his head, asking what Domenico Castellano really wanted from him, what price this generosity would ultimately carry. He'd walked 40 blocks to return a wallet, and somehow that simple act of honesty had opened a door Marcus had thought permanently closed. The question now was whether that door led to salvation or something else entirely. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the address on Domenico's second card 15 minutes early, his old military training insisting on punctuality even, though nothing about his appearance suggested discipline. He'd shaved using the supplies he found in the apartment, had put on the clean clothes from the dresser, slightly too large but infinitely better than his streetwear, and had tried to prepare himself for whatever this meeting would bring. The building housed what appeared to be a legitimate import-export business, its lobby professional but not ostentatious. The receptionist, an efficient woman in her 40s, checked his name against an appointment list and directed him to the third floor, without the wariness Marcus had grown accustomed to encountering. Domenico's office was spacious, but not showy, decorated with photographs that suggested a large family and business interests that spanned decades. The man himself rose from behind his desk as Marcus entered, gesturing to a chair positioned across from him. "You look better," Domenico observed, settling back into his own seat. "The apartment is acceptable?" "More than acceptable, sir. Thank you." Marcus sat stiffly, unused to furniture that didn't involve fighting for territory. "Good." Domenico steepled his fingers, studying Marcus with the same assessing gaze from the night before. "I want to be direct with you, Marcus. I have a problem, and I think you might be the solution." Marcus's stomach tightened. Here it came, the catch, the expectation, the price for generosity. "What kind of problem?" "I have a warehouse operation that handles legitimate shipments from overseas. Electronics, mostly, some luxury goods. The previous security supervisor was stealing from me, skimming inventory, allowing certain shipments to disappear." Domenico's expression hardened. "He's been dealt with, but I need someone I can trust to oversee operations going forward. Someone with military discipline and an understanding of inventory control and security protocols." "You want me to be a security supervisor?" Marcus heard the disbelief in his own voice. "I want someone who will walk 40 blocks in the rain to return a wallet full of cash rather than pocket it. That kind of integrity can't be taught." Domenico leaned forward slightly. "I'm not offering charity, Marcus. This is a real job with real responsibilities. The pay is competitive, the hours are long, and I expect results. But it's legitimate work, and it comes with health insurance that will cover the physical therapy you clearly need for that leg." Marcus's hand moved unconsciously to his injured calf. "Sir, I appreciate this, but I need to know, what else comes with this job? What aren't you telling me?" Domenico's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're smart to ask. Yes, there are aspects of my business that operate in gray areas. But the warehouse operation you'd be overseeing is completely legitimate. You'd be supervising a team of 6, managing inventory, coordinating with shipping companies, and ensuring that what comes in matches what goes out. Nothing illegal, nothing that would compromise whatever moral code got you through 3 tours in Afghanistan. And if I discover something that isn't legitimate? Then you bring it to me immediately, and I deal with it." Domenico's voice carried absolute certainty. "I'm transitioning my operations away from the old ways, Marcus. My father built an empire through means I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to build something different. That requires people I can trust to be honest about what they see, not people who'll look the other way for a bribe." Marcus studied the man across the desk, trying to read truth from intention. Domenico Castellano radiated power and control, But there was something else beneath it, a weariness that Marcus recognized from his own mirror, the exhaustion of carrying too much for too long. "Why me?" Marcus asked finally. "You don't know me. For all you know, I'm an addict or a drunk, or someone who'll steal you blind the first chance I get. You're none of those things." Domenico pulled a folder from his desk drawer and opened it, revealing paperwork Marcus recognized as his military service record. "I had you checked out. Exemplary service record, 3 commendations for valor, honorable discharge due to combat injuries. The VA notes indicate PTSD and chronic pain management issues, but no substance abuse flags." He closed the folder. "You became homeless because the system failed you, not because you failed yourself. There's a difference." The fact that Domenico had investigated him should have felt invasive. Instead, Marcus felt oddly validated, as if someone had finally bothered to look beyond the surface to see who he actually was. "What happens if I say no?" Marcus needed to know if refusing was actually an option. "Then you keep the apartment for the 3 months I promised. No strings attached. I help you connect with VA services that might be more effective than what you've encountered so far. And I wish you well." Domenico spread his hands. "I meant what I said last night. There are no conditions on that apartment except that you use it to get back on your feet. This job is separate. An opportunity, not an obligation." Marcus thought about the streets, about the constant vigilance and vulnerability, about the way 3 years of homelessness had ground him down to someone he barely recognized. He thought about purpose and structure, and the possibility that maybe, possibly, he could be more than just a survival machine focused on making it through one more day. "When would I start?" Domenico's expression shifted into something like satisfaction. "Today, if you're ready. I'll have someone take you to the warehouse, introduce you to the team, show you the operation. You'll shadow the current temporary supervisor for a week, then take over full responsibility." He stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Welcome aboard, Marcus. Don't make me regret trusting you." Marcus shook his hand, feeling the firmness of Domenico's grip, the weight of expectations being transferred. "I won't, sir." The warehouse was in Red Hook, a sprawling facility that hummed with the organized chaos of a busy operation. Marcus spent his first week learning the inventory system, studying security protocols, and observing the team he'd be supervising. The temporary supervisor, a retired cop named Rodriguez, walked him through everything with patient thoroughness, clearly relieved to be handing off responsibility to someone else. "Mr. Castellano is particular about accuracy," Rodriguez explained as they reviewed shipping manifests. "Everything gets documented. Everything gets verified. If something doesn't match up, you report it immediately. No exceptions, no trying to figure it out yourself." Marcus absorbed the information with the same focused intensity he'd brought to military training. The work was physical enough to be engaging, but structured enough to feel manageable. His leg ached by the end of each shift, but the health insurance Domenico had provided allowed him to finally see a physical therapist who prescribed exercises that actually helped. The team he inherited was a mix of personalities, some wary of the new supervisor, who'd appeared from nowhere, others cautiously welcoming. Marcus fell back on his military leadership training, establishing clear expectations while remaining approachable, enforcing rules consistently while recognizing good work. Within 2 weeks, the operation was running more smoothly than it had in months. He saw Domenico only occasionally during this period, brief visits to the warehouse, where the older man would observe operations without interfering, asking pointed questions that demonstrated he understood the business far better than his hands-off management style might suggest. Marcus found himself working harder than necessary, driven by a need to prove he deserved the trust that had been placed in him. 6 weeks into the job, Marcus caught the discrepancy. A shipment of high-end electronics had arrived, with paperwork indicating 40 units, but the actual count came up too short. It was the kind of thing that could be chalked up to clerical error, easy to overlook or attribute to someone miscounting at the origin point. But Rodriguez's training echoed in Marcus's mind. Everything gets documented. Everything gets verified. He spent 3 hours that evening cross-referencing paperwork, checking security footage, and interviewing team members who'd handled the shipment. The missing units had been loaded at origin but had disappeared somewhere during transit, before the container reached the warehouse. Marcus called Domenico that night, violating the unspoken rule about not bothering the boss outside business hours. "Sir, we have a problem with the electronics shipment that arrived today." Domenico listened without interrupting as Marcus laid out the facts: the discrepancy, the documentation trail, his conclusions about where and how the theft had occurred. When Marcus finished, there was a long silence. "You could have overlooked this," Domenico said finally. "Could have written it off as clerical error and saved yourself the hassle of investigating." "Yes, sir. But you hired me to ensure accuracy and integrity. This is what that looks like." Another pause. "I'll handle the shipping company investigation. You did exactly right, Marcus. Thank you." The call ended, leaving Marcus with the unsettled feeling that he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. The following week, Domenico appeared at the warehouse during Marcus's lunch break. "Walk with me," he said without preamble, leading Marcus outside to the parking area where his car waited. They drove in silence through Brooklyn's industrial waterfront, eventually parking near a small restaurant that looked like it had been serving the same menu since the 1950s. Inside, Domenico was greeted with the warm familiarity reserved for regular customers. They settled into a corner booth with red vinyl seats and laminated menus that didn't really need consulting. "That shipping company you identified," Domenico said once their coffee had been served. "They've been skimming inventory for months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger immediate alarm. You caught what 6 other security supervisors missed." He stirred sugar into his coffee with methodical precision. "Do you know why you succeeded where they failed?" "Because I was looking," Marcus offered. "Because you care." Domenico set down his spoon. "Those other supervisors did their jobs adequately. They followed protocols, managed their teams, kept things running, but they didn't care about the details because they didn't see the operation as theirs. You do. You take ownership. It's how I was trained, sir. In the Marines, your team's success was your responsibility." "Exactly." Domenico leaned forward slightly. "I want to expand your responsibilities, Marcus. Not just the warehouse, but oversight of all my legitimate operations: the shipping, the storage facilities, the distribution network. You'd be my operations director, reporting directly to me." The offer was so unexpected that Marcus could only stare. "Sir, I've been working for you less than 2 months. That's a significant promotion for someone who was homeless 8 weeks ago." "It's a significant opportunity for someone who's proven himself reliable and honest." Domenico's expression grew more serious. "I told you I'm trying to build something different than what my father built. That requires people who aren't part of the old system, who don't have loyalties or debts tied to the old ways. You're clean, Marcus. You have no connections to any of the families, no obligations beyond what we agree on. That's exactly what I need." Marcus thought about what was being offered. Not just a job, but a career. Not just a paycheck, but a future. The cynical part of his mind, the part shaped by 3 years of survival, whispered that this was too good to be true, that eventually the other shoe would drop, and he'd discover what Domenico really wanted from him. But the rest of him, the part that had walked 40 blocks to return a wallet, that had spent 6 weeks proving his worth, that remembered what it felt like to have purpose, wanted to believe that maybe, possibly, this was exactly what it appeared to be. A second chance. An opportunity to rebuild what the war and the streets had torn down. "I accept," Marcus said. "On one condition." Domenico's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You're in a position to make conditions." "Just one." Marcus held his gaze steadily. "If I ever discover that your operations cross lines I can't live with, I walk away. No hard feelings, no retaliation, just a clean break. I need to know that's possible. Something that might have been respect flickered across Domenico's face. Agreed. But Marcus, I don't think that situation will arise. The operations you'll be overseeing are completely legitimate. I give you my word on that. They shook hands across the table, sealing an agreement that felt like more than just an employment contract. Marcus had the sense that he'd just committed to something larger than he fully understood, but for the first time in years, that feeling was accompanied by hope rather than dread. The next 6 months transformed Marcus's life in ways he struggled to articulate. The work was demanding but satisfying, requiring him to use skills he'd thought irrelevant outside the military: strategic thinking, logistics coordination, personnel management. Domenico proved to be a hands-off manager who trusted his people until given reason not to, providing resources and support while expecting results. Marcus hired 2 assistants to help manage the expanding operations, both veterans he'd met through VA programs. He implemented new security protocols that reduced shrinkage by 40%. He negotiated better terms with shipping companies, streamlined inventory processes, and built relationships with suppliers that benefited Domenico's entire organization. The apartment that had started as temporary charity became home. Marcus furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing each item with the deliberation of someone who'd learned to value stability. He attended physical therapy religiously, regaining strength and mobility in his injured leg. He connected with other veterans through support groups, discovering that sharing his experiences helped diminish their power over him. And slowly, carefully, he began to rebuild trust in himself and in the possibility of a future that extended beyond mere survival. Domenico remained a somewhat mysterious figure, generous with opportunities but private about his personal life, clearly powerful, but careful about how that power manifested. Marcus occasionally saw evidence of the less legitimate aspects of Domenico's business: meetings with men who carried themselves like soldiers, but weren't, phone conversations conducted in Italian that ended abruptly when Marcus entered the room. The deferential treatment Domenico received in certain neighborhoods that spoke of influence beyond mere business success. But true to his word, Domenico kept Marcus's operations completely separate from whatever else he was involved in. The warehouses handled legitimate goods. The distribution network served real businesses. The books were clean and would withstand any audit. Marcus's conscience remained untroubled, his moral boundaries respected. It was almost too good to be true, and perhaps that was why Marcus wasn't entirely surprised when the other shoe finally dropped. The meeting was called for a Sunday evening, unusual enough to set Marcus's instincts on edge. Domenico's tone on the phone had been serious, but not alarming, requesting rather than demanding Marcus's presence at his Upper East Side apartment, the same building where Marcus had returned the wallet 9 months earlier. Marcus arrived promptly, was cleared by security with professional efficiency, and was shown to a private study lined with books in multiple languages. Domenico sat behind a massive desk, but he stood as Marcus entered, gesturing to comfortable chairs arranged around a coffee table rather than maintaining the formality of the desk. "Thank you for coming," Domenico said, his expression grave. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before making any decisions." Marcus's stomach tightened, but he nodded, settling into the indicated chair. 9 months ago, I lost my wallet on Fifth Avenue after leaving a restaurant, Domenico began. It wasn't an accident. I left it there deliberately, placed it carefully where someone would find it, and then I watched from across the street to see what would happen. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You tested me." "Yes." Domenico didn't flinch from the admission. "I'd been looking for someone like you, someone with integrity that couldn't be bought, someone whose moral code was genuine rather than convenient. I had a dozen men watching that street corner that night, observing everyone who passed that wallet. You were the 7th person to notice it. The others either walked past or picked it up and walked away with it. You set up an elaborate test, and I happened to be the one who passed it." Marcus heard the bitterness in his own voice, felt the anger building in his chest. Everything since then, the apartment, the job, all of it, was based on a manipulation. No. Domenico leaned forward, his expression intense. The test was real, yes, but everything that followed was earned, Marcus. I gave you an opportunity, but you're the one who made it into a career. You're the one who proved yourself valuable beyond my initial expectations. The test got you in the door. Your character and competence kept you there. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the city. The view was spectacular from this height, the lights stretching endlessly in all directions. He thought about that November night 9 months ago, about walking 40 blocks in the rain with a wallet that could have changed his circumstances immediately, about the choice he'd made and everything that had followed from it. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked without turning around. "Because someone else knows about the test. Someone who wants to use that information against me to suggest that my operations are built on manipulation and coercion rather than legitimate business." Domenico's voice remained steady. "I wanted you to hear it from me first, to understand the full context before anyone could twist it into something it wasn't." Marcus turned to face him. "And what was it exactly, if not manipulation?" "An opportunity extended to someone who demonstrated qualities I value." Domenico stood as well. "Marcus, I meant every word I said to you that night, and every commitment I've made since. Yes, I created a situation to identify someone with integrity, but I didn't force you to walk those 40 blocks. I didn't make you refuse the reward money. I didn't compel you to work harder than necessary or to catch discrepancies other supervisors missed. Those were your choices, revealing who you are." "You played me." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I gave you a chance to play yourself," Domenico corrected, "and you played it brilliantly. The question now is whether you can accept that the beginning of our relationship was somewhat manufactured, while recognizing that everything since has been authentic." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing conflicting emotions: anger at the manipulation, gratitude for the opportunities, confusion about what was real and what had been orchestrated. He thought about the person he'd been 9 months ago, homeless and hopeless, and the person he'd become, someone with purpose and prospects, and a future that extended beyond the next meal or the next place to sleep. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "Of course." Domenico moved to his desk, producing an envelope. "This contains documentation of everything I've told you, as well as a severance package equivalent to 2 years' salary. If you decide you can't continue working for me, I'll understand. The apartment is yours regardless. I've had the deed transferred to your name. You owe me nothing, Marcus. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not continued service. Just understand that if you choose to leave, you're walking away from something real because of how it started, not because of what it became." Marcus took the envelope without opening it, the weight of it feeling heavier than mere paper should. "I'll give you my answer within the week." He walked out of the apartment building into the November night, almost exactly a year since he'd first stood on this same sidewalk, cold and homeless, and holding a wallet that would change his life. The city looked different now, or maybe he looked at it differently. Either way, everything felt uncertain again. The stability he'd built revealed as having foundations he hadn't fully understood. For 3 days, Marcus wrestled with the decision. He consulted with a lawyer to verify the documents Domenico had provided. Everything was legitimate. The severance package was real. The apartment deed had indeed been transferred. He talked with his therapist about manipulation and agency, about whether accepting help built on a test invalidated everything that followed. He walked the city for hours, trying to recapture the mindset of that November night when he'd made a choice that had seemed simple at the time. On the 4th day, he returned to the building where it had all started. The same doorman recognized him this time, greeting him with professional courtesy rather than wariness. Marcus made his way to Domenico's office, the envelope tucked under his arm, his decision made. Domenico looked up as Marcus entered, his expression carefully neutral, revealing nothing of what he hoped Marcus's answer would be. "I'm staying," Marcus said without preamble. "But on revised terms." Domenico gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I'm listening. The test you set up, it bothers me. But what bothers me more is the idea that I'd walk away from something valuable because I'm too proud or too angry to acknowledge that unconventional beginnings don't negate real outcomes." Marcus set the envelope on the desk between them. "You gave me an opportunity. I chose to take it and to make it into something. Whether you engineered that first encounter or it happened organically doesn't change the choices I've made since." A pragmatic perspective. Domenico's expression remained unreadable. "A realistic one," Marcus corrected. "But here's what changes. No more tests. No more manipulations, however well-intentioned. If you have concerns about my work or my loyalty, you address them directly. And in exchange, you get my continued service and my honesty about everything I observe in your operations, including things you might prefer I didn't notice. You're negotiating." A small smile played at Domenico's lips. "I didn't expect that." "You hired me for integrity and competence. This is what both look like when applied to our working relationship." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I'm not naive enough to think you don't have other agendas, other operations I'm not privy to. But the parts I do oversee will remain clean, and I'll remain honest about what I see. That's the deal. Take it or revise it, but understand those are my terms for staying." Domenico was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing Marcus with the same calculating intensity from that first night. Then he extended his hand across the desk. "Agreed. No more tests. Just honest partnership built on mutual respect and clearly understood boundaries." Marcus shook his hand, and something that had been tense in his chest finally relaxed. "Then I'll see you tomorrow morning for the operations review." "Marcus!" Domenico's voice stopped him at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. And I'm sorry for the deception, even if I don't entirely regret the results it produced." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology for what it was. Imperfect, but genuine. "For what it's worth, sir, I'm glad I returned that wallet. Even knowing what I know now, I'd make the same choice." As he left the building and stepped out into the November afternoon, Marcus felt the weight of the past year settle into something like acceptance. His life had been built on a test he hadn't known he was taking, but the person he'd become in the year since was real. The work he did was valuable. The home he'd created was solid. The future he was building extended beyond survival to something that looked almost like success. The streets that had once been his prison now represented possibility. The city that had been indifferent to his suffering now offered opportunities he was equipped to pursue. And the choice he'd made on a November night, to walk 40 blocks to return a wallet when pocketing the cash, would have been easier, had proven to be the right one, even if the circumstances surrounding it were more complicated than he'd understood at the time. Marcus walked home through the gathering darkness, his legs steady beneath him, his mind clear, his future uncertain but no longer terrifying. He'd been tested and had passed, had been manipulated but had emerged stronger, had been homeless and was now housed, had been purposeless and now had direction. Whatever Domenico Castellano's full agenda might be, whatever else lurked beneath the surface of their relationship, Marcus had secured something valuable. The knowledge that when presented with a choice between easy profit and difficult integrity, he'd chosen correctly. And that choice, more than any test or manipulation, had determined the trajectory of everything that followed. It was enough. For now, it was enough.